Welcome to The Big Picture. I'm Phil Arno. Elections have consequences. I guess when you think about it, there's not one part of your life that isn't affected by government, by bureaucracy. Really, if you think about it, driving your car, owning your property, buying your food, it's all regulated by the government. And we're coming up to an election, especially nationally, but here in New York State, that will have influences over your life. You'll hear all kinds of opinions. Both sides, every side has got their own insight into the way the world works. Rather than me going off on all kinds of tangents, I've got the real expert with me today to discuss the elections and what we should be looking for. Vic Martucci of Vic Martucci and Associates is with me today. Welcome, Vic.
Thanks.
And,
great to be here.
There's no shortage of topics that we can cover. New York State is divided geographically so well defined. New York City outweighs the rest of the state so much that people in Western New York often get the feeling that, hey, no matter what I do, it's not going to affect how we live our lives because the guys down in New York State, in New York City, they control everything. Do we have any influence over what's going on in Albany?
The short answer is yes, to a certain extent, and maybe even more so now than the last time you and I were together, because we have a governor from upstate New York for the first time in over a century. So you have that, and then the other thing is that the upstate delegations to the New York State Assembly and the New York State Senate are very well organized, and they understand, particularly during the budget process, that New York City is an entity unto itself. It has its own unique problems on a much larger scale than what you have upstate. And so out of necessity, they've learned to work together, to band together, to make sure that upstate gets their fair share of state dollars in the budget. So from that perspective, there is influence upstate. When it comes to other types of policy where it's more social, that kind of thing, the Democrats have a veto-proof majority in both houses of the legislature. And so, while they tend to be more moderate upstate, if you're a Republican, it's difficult because Republicans are in the minority in both houses of the legislature. Although we do have the minority leader in the state Senate, Rob Ort from Western New York, from Niagara County, and he does a good job. He's developed a good relationship with the governor. And is able to work with her. So,
well, I'll give you one example. That I've been going over the last few weeks. I've talked to some people who are very concerned about Proposition 1. They claim, and these are local people here in Western New York. They claim that it basically would take parental rights away when it comes to minors, little children, who say they want to be changed from boy to girl, girl to boy, et cetera. That this proposition would basically say parents have no say in that. It would allow females to be competing with guys who basically say they're women in sports. Now, if you hear a lot of the advertisements, it's called an equal rights amendment, to our Constitution, I guess, and what it's touted as is basically equality for people and giving people the right to do what they want to do and protecting people and so on and so forth. But that's not, when you look into the depth of it, there's some troubling aspects of it that I don't think a lot of people know about. I heard a poll that said 87% of the people in the New York City area support it, and even statewide, it averages out to over 60% support it.
That's right. So the proposition itself codifies equal rights based on gender, based on it's designed to give all types of people equal rights, whether you're transgender, whether you're male, female, whatever it is. It doesn't explicitly say that parents will not have the right to make decisions for their children. You have to take that leap and say, okay, if this is in the state constitution, legally, will the state be able to enact policy that will have the impact that you just described? And there's a differing of opinion on that.
Okay.
Some lawyers will tell you no, some lawyers will tell you yes. But there's nothing explicit in the proposition itself that says that that's what's going to happen.
Interesting. When you hear about these things in the media and in advertisements, obviously they say what they want you to hear,
right?
And how they want you to think. And it's amazing because people don't have the time, or sometimes they don't have the interest in looking into the depth of the situation.
Right.
I would say anybody who's out there ready to vote, do a little research on what you're voting for. Not only the candidates, but those things like the propositions and so on, because they will affect the state. And by any standard, and you say we've had Kathy Hochul in as governor for the last 3 years. There was a study put out by the Business Association of New York State that basically gave us statistics and saying over the last 3 years, New York State has lost $1 trillion in value and assets to other states. $1 trillion. That's not a good direction to go in. No,
I would say this though. I would look at any statistics that go back into the pandemic with some caution, because my gut tells me that a lot of what transpired, not all of it, but a lot of what transpired in terms of people making a decision to leave New York had something to do with the experience of the pandemic. And every state treated the pandemic differently. Some were more restrictive than others. And you can debate who was right and who was wrong. But there were states that were less restrictive. And I think that probably plays a role into some people's decision to leave. But what goes around comes around, and for example, a lot of those people went to Florida, and now Florida, after 2 successive hurricanes on the west coast of Florida, people are now saying, you know what, the grass looked greener on the other side.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons when you think about it why people make a decision to uproot.
Right.
And I don't think it's as simple as, it's because of taxes. It's because of weather. It's because of how my state handled the pandemic. It's really a life-changing decision to pick up and
it's
leave.
Tough. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and it's not an easy decision to make, and I suspect it's not a simple decision to make.
In all fairness, I spent 20 years out in Los Angeles, and I came back here to raise kids and to increase my quality of life because I wouldn't have to wait in line for everything. And I was putting some pictures up on the mantle, the fireplace, and I started looking for the earthquake putty.
Yeah.
And then I realized, wait a second, I don't have to worry about that here.
That's right.
So every area of the country has their character shaped by where they are. I mean,
Yeah.
Florida is, you know, in the Carolinas, there's tropical storms, there's hurricanes, and the West Coast there's earthquakes. In the middle of the country there's tornadoes. Buffalo has snow.
Yeah.
And for all intent and purposes, we can deal with snow most of the time.
Yeah, other than what happened a couple of years ago, which was a once in 100 years,
Yeah.
probably 1,000 years snowstorm,
Yeah.
we can manage it.
Yeah. So,
But I just, you know, you talk about, you know, looking for the
earthquake.
earthquake putty. I was just down in Austin, Texas for a few days with my daughter, and the amount of traffic there is just incredible. And, you know, it's the old saying in Western New York, you can get anywhere in 20 minutes.
Right.
And all of that contributes to the quality of life.
Believe me, if you live in Western New York, if you haven't lived anywhere else, you don't know what a traffic jam really is.
That's exactly right.
Believe my words.
That is exactly right.
In Los Angeles, every time you get into your car, you're going to be waiting. You're waiting to go to the grocery store, waiting to go to the restaurant, waiting to go to work, waiting to go. It's an incredibly different world when you go to a different city. Buffalo truly is lucky when it comes to traffic.
Yeah, and I know I'm a homer. My kids, we're fortunate. My wife and I, our three kids all live here. They're grown up, but they stayed here. Our granddaughter obviously is here. But I've been in a lot of places in this country, and I don't think there's a better place to raise a family than Western New York.
You know, it's funny you say that. When I first started working at Channel 7, Clip Smith was the weather guy there, and, you know, Clip was a great guy. And we would go to lunch every once in a while to Balo's, believe it or not, the old Balo's.
Yep.
And Clip would tell me, you know, I've been in other markets, you know, he was in Philadelphia and he was in bigger markets. And he said, and I came back here to live. And people ask me if I'm crazy. You know, why would I come back here to Buffalo? And he told me, unless you've lived somewhere else, you don't realize how good you have it in Buffalo.
That's exactly right.
You know, we have the beaches, we have the ski slopes, we have good theater, we have great restaurants. Buffalo is truly a special place when you compare it to other cities throughout the country.
No question.
You know.
That you and I agree on.
Well, finally, something to agree on. Well, you know what? We agree on one thing. You should stay tuned for the next segment because it's going to be even more interesting than this segment. We'll be back right after this. Welcome back to The Big Picture. My guest is Vic Martucci, political guru. I don't know that that's the official term, you know, the title that you go by. But
no, well, I've been called worse. So
we talked a lot about New York State in the last segment, and a little bit about Buffalo and how good we have it here. That brings me to Erie County and some of the things that are going on in Erie County. You know, Mark Poloncarz, you know, last time I was in, he told me this was going to be the last time he was going to be running, you know, that he was going to be a county executive. Mm-hmm. The immigrant situation is nationally commanding a lot of attention. Here in Buffalo, we have our share of immigrants. The immigrant population, actually, total in Buffalo is almost 60,000 people. Mm-hmm. Of that, I'm not quite sure how many are undocumented immigrants, but I know that 4,000 or 5,000 people minimum are being housed in hotels and facilities around the area that are undocumented at taxpayer expense. There have been some reports of crime, trouble, various other things. It doesn't get a lot of attention. Overall, though, Erie County, how's it doing?
Well, I think compared to a lot of other places around the country, it's doing pretty well. Buffalo and Erie County has an infrastructure in place to deal with immigration that a lot of other communities around the country don't have. This has always been a welcoming community for immigrants, and there's a whole network of programs and services, many of which are not funded by public dollars, but by private dollars, that help people assimilate into our culture, have a pathway to citizenship, and in some cases, a pathway to asylum because they're here legitimately for reasons of persecution, economic displacement, war, whatever it might be in their home country, and they've come here either to seek asylum in the United States or in Canada. And so we're uniquely situated to handle it here. What no community could be prepared for was what happened recently with New York City being overwhelmed with undocumented immigrants, and they contracted with local hotels to house many, not many of the immigrants that had gone to New York City, but some of them, because they couldn't handle it all in New York City. And so there was nothing here to prepare us to deal with that. There's always going to be problems. I mean, you don't have 100% population of displaced, undocumented immigrants and say that there aren't some bad apples. But the majority of them are families that came here with the hope of a better future for their kids and their family. It's the beacon of the United States that drew them here. You know, we can debate whether or not it was appropriate for them to cross the border the way they crossed the border. That's a whole other issue. But once they're here, there should be a way, a rational way, to help these people gain citizenship eventually in our country. And I think that's where the system is really broken down, is that for years this country has not had a rational immigration policy.
Yeah, it's quite the issue today, you know, nationally and throughout every state, really, every jurisdiction. Overall, though, in Erie County, economically, you know, immigration aside, how is Erie County doing overall? And the legislature is controlled by Democrats. The county executive is a Democrat. You know, one-party rule is always a little problematic, but, you know, overall, how are the policies working over the last several years?
So I think you have to start out understanding that there's a limited amount, there's a limited number of ways that local government can control the economics of
a lot of state mandates,
of their communities.
Yeah,
right,
right.
But having said that, there was a report out, I think this week, as recent as this week, where unemployment in Erie County is down to 3.4%. You know, the number of people that are looking for jobs has dropped, and so, you know, by traditional economic definitions, we're at full employment. You know, the cost of housing has gone up significantly. That's a double-edged sword. For people that don't own a home, that are looking to buy a home, that makes it difficult. But conversely, if you own a home, for many people, middle class and lower middle class folks, the majority of their wealth is in the equity of their home.
You know, that's a gotcha, though. In one respect, it's a plus and a minus, because a lot of people who raised their family and paid off their home and now want to downsize or want to move, you know, they have to buy.
Sure.
They have to go someplace, and so...
No question.
You know, it kind of balances out. They get more for their home, but then they turn around and look at the market, and it's a shock.
Yeah.
You know, Buffalo, getting to that locality and that government, you know, Byron just left. Chris Scanlon is taking over a city that's got $50 or $60 million in debt. Okay, how is that going to play out? Is that going to really handcuff him in the next year before, he gets to run again?
So the city doesn't have $50 or $60 million of debt, and I know you know the difference. There's probably a $40 to $45 million deficit in its budget, but that's not necessarily their debt load. And I know that the acting mayor is looking at ways to close that gap, and that's going to be his challenge going into next year. Is can they wrap their arms around it and reduce the size of that deficit without cutting important services, and without raising taxes in any significant way?
And that's the key. It's almost an impossibility to keep everybody happy, and government is loath to cut spending. So they tend to often look for other ways to raise revenue, which means taxes and fees and so on.
Yep.
But cutting costs eventually, if you have a household, that's kind of struggling in the economy, or if you have credit card debt, or whatever, you end up cutting costs. Individuals, people with common sense say, you know what, I got to spend less money. I got to get a hold of this. Government officials don't think like that, mostly because it's not their money. I mean, they're not turning around and opening up their wallet.
Yeah.
They're working with other people's money, and that's universal through all government officials on every level. It's an impersonal thing. So they can say, you know what, we really want to help people. Let's spend this money.
I don't disagree with that in general. But what I would tell you is, and based on my own experiences, there's a significant difference between local government and state government and federal government. Local government really is like a retail business. People pay local property taxes to get services that they need: snow plowing, fire protection, police protection. What in those services are you prepared to cut? And those are the highest cost services that a municipality provides. So when I say the proposition or the challenge for the acting mayor in Buffalo is, how do you get the deficit under control without cutting services? Those are services that people can't do without. When you get to higher levels of government, state and federal government, good people can have a reasonable disagreement over what's necessary and what's not necessary. But at the local level, these are services that when you pay $1 in property taxes, you want to get $1 in services back. And that's what municipal government is.
I'm not an expert on government because I've never had a government position, but I've worked with a lot of politicians and a lot of government officials over my career in media. And I understand that, there are compromises everywhere. There's trying to make people happy. There's trying to follow party rules and, their strategies. Most of the time, what makes most sense is for economic reasons, try to stimulate growth by giving tax cuts to the people who produce, so that they produced more. A lot of government officials, and one party in particular, tends to want to raise revenues from fees and taxes, and it's a different philosophy. And no party is perfect, but if he has a challenge, if Scanlon has a challenge, eliminating the deficit, stimulating growth, which operationally brings in more taxes and more fees and so on, would seem to be the way to go.
Well, but the problem for a municipal government is that they don't receive revenue from income taxes, and that's really when you stimulate economic growth. Most of the revenue that's generated through economic growth is generated through income tax collections. Mm-hmm. Now, they do get a share of the county sales tax, the county share of the sales tax, And as the economy is growing and people are spending more money, that's additional revenue to the city. But most of their revenue comes from the property tax. And the challenge that a city like Buffalo has is they have an inordinately high percentage of properties that are tax exempt, that are owned by churches, that are owned by non-for-profit organizations, that are exempt from paying property taxes. So again, at the local level, at the municipal level, the value proposition is delivering services that people require. And I don't think anybody would debate that. Getting your garbage picked up, having police protection, having fire protection, having public schools, all of those things are public services that are delivered at the municipal level that everybody needs for their quality of life, for just for their life in general.
We've got about a minute left, maybe actually less than a minute. For the final few seconds, is there anything that you can say about, we've got a week till election, day, and so, thinking about how people vote locally and nationally, is there any advice that you can give people who are about ready to go out and vote?
Now more than ever, there's a lot of information that's available to people. And my best advice to you is, number one, do your homework. Do your homework and understand what the candidates' positions are on the issues. Understand what's important to you and whatever your main priorities are. And then secondly, actually 1B, is make sure you vote.
Sure you vote.
Because people that don't vote and then complain about government, that's a pet peeve of mine.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, this has been a good conversation, and we've got a week till election. Next week we'll have Vic back, and we'll talk more about national politics. But when you're looking at this show, one of the things that you should take away from it is what Vic just said. We here in this country are so privileged to be able to have input as to who helps us run our affairs publicly, and how things are determined. We only do that through votes, okay? That's the main way we can influence the things that go on around us through regulation and so on. So I would highly recommend, as Vic said, do your homework and go out and vote. And thank you for watching The Big Picture. We really appreciate it. WBBZ is your local TV station, and we depend on you to stay around. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on The Big Picture.